Nissan is dead, or at least it's on the brink of collapse, and the situation is worse than you might think. Their partner Renault wants to dump them, their profits have fallen almost 90%, and senior employees warn they only have 12 months to live if things don't change. And this isn't even their first shave with death. But are you really surprised? Like, when was the last time you heard someone excited to buy a Nissan? The fact of the matter is, they have been dying for a long time. So buckle up, because today we're diving in and uncovering all the crazy ups and downs that have gotten them into this mess. And trust me, you don't want to miss this one. To understand how Nissan got into this situation, we need to rewind a little to the 1910s. It was a time when Japanese roads basically had no Japanese cars, instead being dominated by foreign players such as Ford and GM. That's when a young Masujiro Hashimoto established Kansai Motor Works. Just 3 years later, he produced their first car, the DAT, a small thing that could barely reach 32 kilometers an hour. The rest of their early years is a bit of a mess of mergers and acquisitions, but eventually by 1933, Nihon Sangyo Company listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, their ticker Nissan. A couple years later, they released the Datsun Type 14. That's right, Nissan were officially selling cars under the name Datsun. But it worked. Datsuns were selling like hotcakes around the world, with models like the 510 being lauded for their performance and value. And the oil crisis of the 70s only turbocharged their rise, with cheap, fuel-efficient Japanese cars captivating a price-conscious American buyer. Nissan were also popping off amongst enthusiasts. In 1969, they released one of my favorite cars ever, the gorgeous Fairlady Z, selling over 500,000 units across its 9-year production run. And did you really think I forgot about the GTRs? I mean, in the late 80s, Nissan didn't miss. The R32 GTR went down as one of the most dominant race cars of all time, winning 29 JTCC races in a row. It was such a cheat code that down under, they banned the car after winning back-to-back Bathurst 1000 races. This truly was a golden age for Nissan. Their lineup at the time was basically the who's who of iconic JDM cars. Silvias, GTR Zs, anything a petrolhead could want, they had. But you see, just like the rest of Japan, Nissan had gotten a bit overexcited, and in 1992, everything started to unravel.
Koizumi may have put Japan back on its feet, but the financial crisis of the past few years knocked it down again. Daily says Japan faces another lost decade unless the government cuts a debt burden that's almost twice the size of the economy.
Japanese asset prices collapsed big time. And you see, there's something I forgot to mention. Nissan's car business was really just the tip of the iceberg, and at the time, the trend amongst big businesses in Japan was to become a zaibatsu, or a diversified conglomerate. Long story short, Nissan had been holding a lot of real estate assets and used a ton of debt to finance it. So when the bubble burst and Tokyo house prices fell a staggering 80%, Nissan felt it. Combine that with the fall in domestic car sales, and the 90s were really a lost decade for Nissan. Oh, and all those epic sports cars, while they look good on a brochure, they were starting to bite Nissan in the butt. At the end of the day, they cost an arm and leg to develop, but they don't really sell well. And to top it all off, most of those cars were made for the Japanese domestic market only, while Japan was in a recession. It really doesn't take a genius to figure out why things were starting to look cooked for Nissan. And I mean really cooked. Drowning in over $20 billion worth of debt, with only 3 of the 46 models they sold turning a profit, Nissan needed a miracle. But while Nissan were teetering at the edge of bankruptcy, on the other side of the world, a rising star was gaining traction. His name, Carlos Ghosn. In the 90s, Ghosn was as close to a rock star as a suit and tie wearing businessman could really get. In his 30s, he turned around Michelin South America and went on to do the same thing at Renault, reviving the brand within just a year of his arrival. By 1996, he was already VP at Renault and had set his sights on his greatest challenge yet: reviving a fallen giant. And so he spearheaded Renault's purchase of a 36% stake in Nissan. When he joined Nissan, they were unprofitable and drowning in debt, but Ghosn wasn't phased, declaring he would resign if he didn't revive the brand. And so he began rapidly cutting costs, earning himself the nickname Le Cost Killer. He slashed jobs, shut down 5 plants, and cut ties with half of Nissan's suppliers. Le Cost Killer also rationalized their product offering, refocusing efforts on more profitable crossover models. And when it was all said and done, by 2002, Nissan were in the green, and by 2003, they were debt-free. Ghosn was a hero in Japan, to the point he was even featured in manga. Nissan were finally thriving. But you see, despite all this hard work, the problem that plagued Ghosn and honestly still continues to plague Nissan was that they're very set in their ways. You see, Nissan and a lot of Japanese companies for that matter love tradition to a fault. They want things to stay how they are. And with this attitude, is it really a surprise that their economy has basically been stagnant since the 90s? As you might expect, a flamboyant, part Lebanese, part Brazilian CEO entering the fray, cutting costs and removing long-standing traditions such as tenure-based pay rises ruffled more than a few feathers. And the 2008 GFC really exposed some of those tensions. Automakers around the world were hurting, including Nissan. But Ghosn, well, he wouldn't back down. He announced that Nissan would actually be trying to increase their market share from 6 to 10%, imposing lofty sales targets on his dealerships, which basically had managers buying cars themselves just to meet quotas. But somehow, by 2017, Ghosn's tactics were working, with Nissan's market share climbing to almost 9.2% of the global car market. But by 2018, things started going south. Nissan's profits fell 45%, all while Ghosn was taking home $17 million a year as one of the highest paid execs in Japan. At the time, he was pushing for a full merger between Nissan and Renault, and I guess it was all too much. Tensions began to boil over, and in November 2018, upon landing in Tokyo for a board meeting, Ghosn was arrested. You see, all those Japanese board members that Ghosn was pissing off, well, they snitched or framed him depending on who you ask. It was alleged that Ghosn had underreported his income and embezzled tens of millions of dollars of company assets to do the usual rich guy things, like buy private jets and many holiday homes. As you might guess, he was facing heavy jail time. But it gets crazier. The following year, Ghosn would escape authorities, fleeing Japan hidden in a music box, in what was truly the escape of the century. But what this all meant for Nissan was their superstar CEO was gone. And less than a year later, the replacement CEO also stepped down after being involved in a similar but less dramatic scandal over so-called excess compensation. Oh, how I wish I had excess compensation. Anyways, all the drama meant that Nissan took their eye off the ball, and today Nissan is once again at death's doorstep. Their profits have fallen almost 90%, and execs warn they only have 12 months to live if things don't change. And all these issues can be traced back to 3 main reasons. The first is poor leadership. After the whole Ghosn debacle, Nissan were really damaged goods, and his successor Hiroto Saikawa stepping down only made things worse. No competent CEO wanted to be seen at the helm of a sinking ship. Pair this with the fact that Ghosn was the glue holding the Nissan-Renault partnership together, and you get a directionless company. So lost that Renault began dumping Nissan shares onto the open market. And is it really a surprise when you see how Nissan's share price compares to Renault's? This lack of direction brings us to EVs. No matter how things look right now, EVs are the future of cars. And Nissan even recognized this way back in 2010 when they released the Leaf, the first ever mass market EV, a full 2 years before Tesla dropped the Model S. But Nissan had to do it the Nissan way. And instead of presenting EVs as exciting, sexy and cool like Tesla did, the Leaf was the opposite. Bland and ugly. But despite this, the sheer fact that this was a relatively cheap EV meant that it sold a whopping 500,000 units globally, making it one of the best-selling EVs in the world. But that's where Nissan really fumbled. Rather than doubling down, they took a whole 7 years to launch a follow-up model, the Leaf 2.0. And by then the EV market had caught up. In a market full of Model 3s and Chevy Bolts, the Leaf couldn't compete. And all that was before our third reason, China. In case you haven't noticed, China has stepped up. You see, in the early 2010s, the Chinese government started dumping, and I mean dumping, money into EVs, encouraging both manufacturers and consumers to go electric. And while it took them a while to get started, China is well and truly dominating EVs right now. Their cars are cheaper and in most cases better. What this meant for Nissan is that in the last 3 years, their sales in China have halved. Combined, these 3 factors have left Nissan in a similar place to the 90s, at the brink of death. They have cut 9,000 jobs and reduced capacity by 20%. But there was a glimmer of hope. In December 2024, talk surfaced about joining forces with Honda, a move that would create the world's 3rd largest automaker. But why Honda? Well, for starters, both companies were Japanese, and both companies have been struggling with the recent China dominance. That being said, Honda has fared much better and has managed to keep its head above water. And by merging, the theory is the combined company would be better equipped to survive. But in typical Nissan fashion, they dropped the ball. Literally 24 hours before I did this voiceover, the story changed yet again, and merger talks between Nissan and Honda are dead, with Nissan's own CEO admitting that without a partner to lean on, survival will be hard. So what went wrong? Word on the street is that Nissan refused to be seen as a lesser brand, despite the fact that Honda has made over 20 times their profit this year. Honestly, if you ask me, Nissan's management is mental for fumbling this merger. Honda were being charitable and throwing them a lifeline, and yet they demanded to be equals. With the Honda merger in the bin, it looks grim for Nissan. Their last hope is Foxconn. Yes, that Foxconn, the Taiwanese company that runs the sweatshops that make your iPhone. Well, the hope is that they might step in and outright acquire Nissan. But with their track record, I'm sure Nissan management will find a way to fumble that too. So do I think Nissan is really dead? In a sense, yes. I don't think Nissan has the right people in place to fix their situation and stand on its own 2 feet. And we will probably see the iconic brand being bought for pennies on the dollar by some Chinese EV maker. Anyways, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of the Nissan situation below. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe for more epic car content.